The morning fog drifts gently across the cobbled streets of a small English town. It is the year 1852. A coal fire crackles behind the hearth of a modest parlor. The room smells faintly of lavender water and warm bread, the scent curling through the air like the steam rising from a china teacup. Outside, the world is waking slowly, carriage wheels creak over stone, and the soft clatter of horse hooves echoes in the distance. But within these walls, all is still. At the desk by the bay window sits Eleanor Whitmore, a young woman of 28, wrapped in a wool shawl. Her inkpot is full, her pen carefully sharpened, and the paper before her, smooth and thick, is patiently waiting. It is letter-writing day, and she has planned it all week. Eleanor writes often, for letters are her tether to the world beyond her village, beyond the hedges, the chapel, the draper's shop, and the green fields that roll out like a lullaby beyond the hills. Her fingers brush over the parchment. She lifts her quill with care, as if drawing breath before a prayer, and begins her letter. My dearest Charlotte. The words form slowly, with rhythm and intention. In Victorian times, a letter was not simply a message. It was a ritual. A quiet, contemplative act. One wrote not only with ink, but with a piece of the self, with the patience of thought and the poetry of heart. Eleanor pauses now and then, her brow creased gently, the feathered pen held mid-air. She is not simply listing events, she is crafting emotion, mood, memory. There is no haste. The act of writing is as meaningful as the words themselves. Behind her, the grandfather clock ticks softly. A sparrow flutters to the window sill, pecking once, then vanishing into the soft drizzle. The firewood shifts and sighs in the grate. Eleanor continues, her hand gliding in long arcs. The Victorians believed letters were a reflection of one's soul. They were taught from young girlhood how to compose their handwriting, how to hold their pen properly, how to write with modesty and grace. Letter writing was both art and etiquette. To write well was to be well thought of. It was a form of personal honor. And so Eleanor writes slowly. She tells Charlotte of the first daffodils that appeared 2 mornings ago, brave against the frost. She writes of Mrs. Tillman's new bonnet, quite ridiculous with its feathers. Of the book she's reading, Byron's poems, and the way the wind has made the windowpane moan like a tired ghost at night. Her quill scratches gently, never rushed. She dips it in the ink, shakes a tiny droplet aside, and continues. Even her silence is companionable. Through her letters, Eleanor is not alone. She connects to others across miles of land and time. Her cousin in Bath, her uncle in Oxfordshire, a school friend now in India with her husband. Each envelope carries not just news, but tenderness. A reminder of love, a whisper of home. She reaches the close of her letter with grace. Your ever affectionate friend, Eleanor. Then, she lifts the letter and reads it aloud softly, a final act of intimacy. It is folded with care, sealed with wax, and marked with her initials. She tucks it into a pale blue envelope and ties it with a fine thread, a habit she finds comforting. In the afternoon, she will walk it to the post office herself, along the damp path lined with violets. It may be weeks before a reply comes. But the wait is part of the rhythm, too. This was the Victorian Age. A time of slower breaths. Of deeper reflection. Of words that lingered like perfume in a locked drawer. And for Eleanor, on this quiet, rain-speckled morning, writing letters is not merely a task. It is a way of being. The writing desk, tucked beside the window, is more than just a piece of furniture. It is a sanctuary. Eleanor keeps her writing desk as others might keep a shrine, polished, organized, intimate. It is made of oak, warm and dark with age, its drawers filled with small treasures. There are compartments for blotting paper, wax seals, spare quills, and envelopes tied with ribbon. A small inkwell rests in a carved holder, its glass reflecting the flickering candlelight. Everything is placed with care, arranged not only for use but for beauty. In the Victorian Age, the writing desk was a reflection of the letter-writer's soul. It was the domain of the personal, the private, the cherished. A place to pour one's thoughts onto paper, sheltered from the outside world. Women like Eleanor often wrote in the early morning or late afternoon, when the house was quietest and the mind calm. A small velvet box sits in the back corner of the desk. Inside are letters she's received over the years. Faded with time, but deeply loved. One is from her father, sent during a trip to Edinburgh when she was just 12. Another is from her cousin Charlotte, describing her new life in the city, with its gas lamps and crowded theaters. Eleanor reads them often. Each one is a memory pressed between folds. Today, she prepares to write again. A letter to her childhood friend Henry, who has gone to serve in Her Majesty's Navy. His last letter spoke of distant shores and strange, golden skies. She smiles as she recalls it. She selects a fine sheet of paper, slightly textured, the edges gently scalloped. She chooses her favorite quill, its feather worn smooth with years of use. Then, she straightens her posture, places a small sand timer beside her inkpot, and begins. Dear Henry. Her script flows, even and practiced. She writes about the roses blooming early this year. About the village's newest rumor, a fox that's been stealing hens. About the silence in the evening, broken only by the ticking of her clock and the distant call of an owl. The desk becomes her world. Here, she need not speak aloud. Here, she does not worry about interrupting or being misunderstood. Her thoughts are allowed to form fully, to rest before being read. In Victorian society, women were often discouraged from speaking freely in public. But through their letters, they could express emotion, philosophy, even wit, without restraint. There's a small chip on the corner of the desk, from the time she dropped her candle holder late at night. She touches it absently as she thinks. There's a scratch near the drawer, made by her cat years ago, now long gone. Every mark is a memory. A letter is not only what's written. It's how it's written. The feel of the paper. The scent of the ink. The sound of the pen as it moves. The creak of the chair. The hush of the room. Each detail, though subtle, forms part of the ritual. That's what makes it sacred. In the glow of the late afternoon light, Eleanor gently opens a small wooden box lined with velvet. Inside rests her collection of quills, some trimmed, some uncut, each one gathered over the years like a set of beloved brushes. There is the swan quill given to her by her uncle when she first began writing letters. The goose quill that came from the countryside near their family's cottage. And the soft gray feather that she found herself, caught in the hedgerow one spring morning. Choosing a quill is like choosing a mood. Today, she selects a long, curved feather, light in the hand, but firm in the stroke. She rolls it between her fingers before turning to her inkwell. Victorian ink was more than a tool. It was an art. Eleanor uses a dark iron gall ink, a mixture of tannin, iron salts, and water. It stains the paper with permanence and darkens as it dries, turning from gray to deep black. The bottle sits cool in her palm, the stopper fitting tightly to preserve its contents. She removes it carefully and pours a little into a shallow ceramic well. Next to her ink is a small knife, the quill cutter. Sharpening a quill requires patience. She places the tip against her thumb, guiding the blade in a careful slice. Not too sharp, not too blunt. She tests it against a scrap of paper, watching how the ink flows. Just right. The pen is now ready. Eleanor dips the quill into the inkwell. She doesn't rush. A single dip must last several words. She gently taps the excess ink on the rim, then sets her hand to the page. The sound of the quill meeting paper is soft and steady. It is not scratching, it is gliding. In the Victorian Age, one learned to write by copying poetry and moral phrases, practicing posture and pressure. Letters were considered an extension of the self. Your handwriting revealed your education, your upbringing, even your state of mind. Slanted letters could suggest haste. Rounded forms were thought gentle. A blot, a smudge. These were things to be avoided at all costs. Eleanor's script is elegant but unpretentious. She keeps her strokes even, her pressure light. Each letter is formed with care, each word allowed to rest on the page before the next takes shape. The ink glistens as it dries. In the quiet of the room, the only sound is the soft whisper of paper and feather. A breeze stirs the curtain. Somewhere, a clock chimes the hour. She doesn't lift her head. She writes to her younger sister, Anne, who lives now in Yorkshire. They haven't seen each other in nearly a year. Eleanor writes about the house, the garden, the blackbird's nest she spotted in the ivy. She writes slowly, tenderly, as if speaking the words aloud in her mind. When the quill runs dry, she pauses, dips it again, then resumes. There is no frustration in this rhythm. Only peace. It is this slowing down that makes the act so intimate. So alive. She pauses midway, to let the ink dry. She leans back in her chair and watches a soft breeze stir the lace curtain. The air smells faintly of chamomile and old wood. She takes a breath, then writes the next paragraph with a steady hand. I hope the sea has been kind to you. She signs it simply. Yours in friendship. Eleanor. Then she dusts it gently with fine sand to blot the ink. She folds the letter, seals it with a wax stamp bearing her family's crest, a tiny sparrow in flight, and places it on the silver tray by the door, ready for tomorrow's post. The writing desk is once again still. The candle flickers. The room darkens as the sun slips behind the hills. In this small corner of her world, Eleanor has once again reached across miles of ocean in silence, and touched a friend. And in the soft stillness that follows, the desk returns to waiting. There is a kind of language spoken not with words, but with paper. Eleanor opens the drawer beneath her writing desk. Inside is her cherished collection of writing paper and envelopes, each set tied with soft ribbon or stacked between layers of tissue. There are creamy parchment sheets, blue-tinted pages edged with tiny silver leaves, and rose-colored cards embossed with her initials. Each has a different feel, some smooth like silk, others slightly textured like linen. In Victorian England, stationery was more than a surface, it was a message in itself. The paper you used, its color, its scent, even the watermark pressed faintly into its fibers, all these things whispered something about you. Eleanor learned this from her mother. That pink stationery was for close friends. Blue-gray was for formal letters. Ivory was always safe, dignified, neutral, never too bold. She also remembers how her mother would hold paper up to the light to inspect its quality. Good writing deserves good paper, she used to say. Today, Eleanor selects a pale lavender sheet, lightly perfumed. She places it on the desk and smooths it with her palm. The paper holds a memory of summer gardens and pressed violets. Scented paper was a quiet delight. Victorians would dab stationery with lavender oil or rose water, believing scent added a personal touch, a presence in the absence. Eleanor prefers soft floral notes, never too heavy. A letter that carries a trace of fragrance feels more alive, more intimate. She pairs the paper with a matching envelope, one with a scalloped edge and a tiny embossed sparrow. Then she reaches for her seal drawer. In Victorian homes, sealing wax was often kept in small tins or carved boxes. Eleanor's is a brass container with a velvet lining, filled with sticks of wax in hues of crimson, plum, and gold. She chooses a soft pink wax today, something gentle, something kind. She writes slowly, letting the lavender paper absorb her thoughts. The quill flows with ease. This letter is for her cousin Lily, who has just had her first child. Eleanor writes with warmth, telling her how much she longs to meet the little one, how sweet the photographs were, how Lily's handwriting looked joyful in the last letter she received. The softness of the paper seems to shape her tone, she writes more tenderly, more dreamily. Stationery, she realizes, is like music in the background. It shapes the feeling, the flow. Once finished, Eleanor folds the sheet neatly, presses it with a handkerchief to ensure the ink has dried, then slides it into the envelope. She lights a small beeswax candle and lets the pink wax melt, pooling onto the flap. With her seal, engraved with a delicate sparrow in flight, she presses gently, and waits. The wax cools and hardens. The seal holds. A final touch. There is satisfaction in this act. In our modern age, we forget how much meaning can be held in simple things. The softness of paper. The hush of folding. The scent that lingers on a page. These were not embellishments, they were part of the conversation. To Eleanor, every letter is a small work of art. The choice of paper, of ink, of seal, each one says something about the moment in which it was written. About the care, the thought, the feeling behind the words. She places the sealed envelope in a basket near the front door, ready for the post. Then she returns to her desk, tidies her supplies, and sits in stillness for a moment longer. The world outside is gray with fog. But inside, the lavender scent lingers in the air, and the echo of the letter remains, a soft reminder that connection can be beautiful. Even in silence. The morning air is cool and damp, the kind that carries the soft scent of earth and chimney smoke. Eleanor wraps her shawl around her shoulders and takes the letter basket in hand. Inside rests the lavender-scented envelope, its wax seal still fresh. The time has come to post it. She opens the front door quietly. A gentle breeze brushes past her, stirring the hem of her skirt. The gravel path that leads from her cottage is speckled with fallen petals and tiny dewdrops. Every footstep crunches softly, the only sound in the still countryside. The journey to the village post office is a slow, familiar ritual. Eleanor walks along the hedge-lined lane, past meadows dotted with wildflowers, their heads bobbing in the wind. A pair of robins flutter ahead of her, and somewhere nearby, a brook murmurs under a stone bridge. To post a letter in the Victorian age was an experience in itself. It was not simply a matter of dropping an envelope into a slot. It was a walk, a moment of movement, a way to step out into the world and greet it with intention. There were no cars, no loud distractions, just the rustle of leaves, the clip of boots on the path, and the occasional distant whistle of a train. Eleanor likes this part of the process. The anticipation of sending something outward, of knowing her thoughts, once sealed in wax, will soon begin their journey. There's something poetic about it. As though she's releasing a bird into the sky, not knowing exactly where the wind will carry it. She passes the stone wall where ivy climbs and a cat lounges lazily, blinking in the soft sun. She nods politely to Mrs. Penrose, who sweeps her front step with rhythmic, sweeping strokes. Everyone along the lane recognizes Eleanor's little basket. It means letters. It means connection. The post office sits at the edge of the village green, nestled between the baker and the apothecary. Its red door is always slightly ajar, and the bell above it jingles softly as she enters. Inside, the shelves are lined with twine, parchment, ink bottles, and tin boxes of sealing wax. Behind the wooden counter, Mr. Alcott, the postmaster, greets her with a warm, familiar nod. "Another to London?" he asks gently. Eleanor smiles. "Yorkshire this time." She hands him the letter with both hands, as if offering something delicate. He stamps it carefully, then places it in the outgoing tray, where dozens of other letters rest, each one a story waiting to be read. The Royal Mail will collect the post later in the day, using horse-drawn carts or the early trains, depending on the route. Eleanor thinks often about the people who carry these letters, the postman, the coachman, the sorters in large echoing halls filled with the scent of paper and ink. The morning air is cool and damp, the kind that carries the soft scent of earth and chimney smoke. Eleanor wraps her shawl around her shoulders and takes the letter basket in hand. Inside rests the lavender-scented envelope, its wax seal still fresh. The time has come to post it. She opens the front door quietly. A gentle breeze brushes past her, stirring the hem of her skirt. The gravel path that leads from her cottage is speckled with fallen petals and tiny dewdrops. Every footstep crunches softly, the only sound in the still countryside. The journey to the village post office is a slow, familiar ritual. Eleanor walks along the hedge-lined lane, past meadows dotted with wildflowers, their heads bobbing in the wind. A pair of robins flutter ahead of her, and somewhere nearby, a brook murmurs under a stone bridge. To post a letter in the Victorian Age was an experience in itself. It was not simply a matter of dropping an envelope into a slot. It was a walk, a moment of movement, a way to step out into the world and greet it with intention. There were no cars, no loud distractions, just the rustle of leaves, the clip of boots on the path, and the occasional distant whistle of a train. Eleanor likes this part of the process. The anticipation of sending something outward, of knowing her thoughts, once sealed in wax, will soon begin their journey. There's something poetic about it. As though she's releasing a bird into the sky, not knowing exactly where the wind will carry it. She passes the stone wall where ivy climbs and a cat lounges lazily, blinking in the soft sun. She nods politely to Mrs. Penrose, who sweeps her front step with rhythmic, sweeping strokes. Everyone along the lane recognizes Eleanor's little basket. It means letters. It means connection. The post office sits at the edge of the village green, nestled between the baker and the apothecary. Its red door is always slightly ajar, and the bell above it jingles softly as she enters. Inside, the shelves are lined with twine, parchment, ink bottles, and tin boxes of sealing wax. Behind the wooden counter, Mr. Alcott, the postmaster, greets her with a warm, familiar nod. "Another to London?" he asks gently. Eleanor smiles. "Yorkshire this time." She hands him the letter with both hands, as if offering something delicate. He stamps it carefully, then places it in the outgoing tray, where dozens of other letters rest, each one a story waiting to be read. The Royal Mail will collect the post later in the day, using horse-drawn carts or the early trains, depending on the route. Eleanor thinks often about the people who carry these letters, the postman, the coachman, the sorters in large echoing halls filled with the scent of paper and ink. The morning sun filters gently through the lace curtains, casting quiet patterns on the polished wooden floor. Eleanor sits by the fire, her tea warm between her hands, when she hears it, a soft knock at the door. It is not loud, not hurried. Just a polite rap and the rustle of shoes on stone. She rises calmly and walks to the entrance, smoothing her apron as she goes. When she opens the door, there he is, the village postman, his coat damp from mist, his cap tipped slightly forward. He smiles and lifts a small bundle wrapped in twine. "A letter for you, Miss Whitmore." She takes it with a gentle nod and thanks him. Then, with the door closed once more and the house quiet again, she carries the letter into the parlor. It is from her sister Anne. She knows even before she breaks the seal. The handwriting is unmistakable, neat, rounded letters with a gentle slant. The envelope is pale cream, the kind Anne always uses. Eleanor's fingers move slowly, untying the twine, breaking the wax, unfolding the paper with care. There is something sacred about receiving a letter. The paper crackles softly. The ink is a little faded at the edges. Her sister's words begin not with urgency, but warmth. "My dearest Eleanor." Reading a letter in the Victorian era was not done quickly. One would often sit down properly, tea at hand, and give the letter one's full attention. Eleanor does exactly this. She returns to her chair, lifts her shawl across her lap, and begins. And writes of her children, how Thomas lost his second tooth and placed it under his pillow, how Clara has learned her first hymn and sings it in the garden without warning. She writes of a robin's nest in the hedge, of her recent embroidery project, and of the way she misses the sound of Eleanor's footsteps in the old hall. As she reads, Eleanor smiles, softly. A few words make her laugh under her breath. One line makes her pause and press her hand over her heart. Receiving a letter is like opening a small, sealed piece of someone's world. Their breath. Their thoughts. It is a message frozen in time, sent across space, now arriving at last. Sometimes, Eleanor will read a letter more than once. Today, she reads ends twice. Then she folds it again and tucks it into her small wooden box, the one that holds years of correspondence, each letter a fragment of memory, a bookmark in her life. Victorian letters were often kept and cherished, tied in bundles with ribbon or stored in boxes lined with velvet. They were reread in times of joy and grief, kept for decades, passed down as heirlooms. Eleanor, too, keeps all of hers. And now, Anne's latest joins the growing collection. And so the letter begins its journey, not just through post offices and across miles, but through time. A message sent in love, to be read in stillness. A soft conversation between souls, unfolding on paper. She feels closer to her sister now. Though many miles lie between them, this letter has made the distance disappear. It is as if Anne had stepped into the room, sat across the hearth, and shared her stories aloud. This is the magic of the written word. The way it connects one soul to another. Outside, the wind rustles the ivy. The house remains quiet. But inside Eleanor, something is blooming, a warmth, a connection. A sense that she is remembered. Loved. She sets the letter on her desk, intending to reply tomorrow. And for the rest of the day, she carries Anne's words with her, like a song playing softly in the back of her mind. And so the letter begins its journey, not just through post offices and across miles, but through time. A message sent in love, to be read in stillness. A soft conversation between souls, unfolding on paper. The room is quiet, lit only by the golden flicker of a single candle. Outside, the rain falls in a steady rhythm, tapping gently against the window panes. Inside, Eleanor sits at her desk, holding a letter she has read many times before. It is not recent. The envelope is worn, the edges faintly curled. But the words within still breathe with emotion. It is a letter from Edward. They met years ago, at a summer gathering in Devon. He was a family friend, kind, thoughtful, always just a little too quiet in groups. But when they spoke alone, he would share small stories, careful ideas, half-finished poems. Eleanor had never met anyone who listened so completely. After that summer, he went north to take up a teaching post. And so began their letters. Eleanor opens his letter slowly. She doesn't need to read it again, but she does. His handwriting is neat, slightly narrow, always written in blue-black ink. He begins with a quiet observation. How the frost had drawn fern-like patterns on the window of his study, how he wished she could have seen it. Your absence is loud, he writes, in the quiet moments of my day. The Victorians often believed that lovers should write slowly. Not only with care, but with emotional discipline. To pour out one's heart too openly was thought improper. And yet, between the lines, so much could be said. Eleanor remembers the long weeks between letters. The waiting. The imagining. She would look for the postman every day, always listening for the familiar knock. When his letters came, she would read them at her desk, often late at night, when the world was still and her thoughts were soft. She remembers how her heart would stir at the small things, the way he described the scent of his books, or the rain on his window. The fact that he thought of her while watching the moon. She has her replies saved too, neatly copied into her journal before they were sent. In them, she wrote carefully, always balancing tenderness with modesty. A Victorian woman's love letter was a quiet thing, more suggestion than confession, more emotion felt than spoken. Your letters are a comfort to me, she once wrote. They are the one place I feel wholly myself. Tonight, she decides to write again. Not because she expects a reply, Edward is now abroad, his letters rarer than ever, but because the act itself brings her peace. She selects cream paper and a fresh quill. Her ink glistens in the candlelight. The room is hushed, as though it, too, is waiting to hear what she will say. My dearest Edward. Her words flow gently, describing the winter fields, the way the river has frozen in places, how the geese have flown south. She tells him of her dreams, small things, quiet longings. She does not say she misses him, but it is in every word. Every pause. Every sigh between sentences. Love letters in the Victorian age were never hasty. They were handwritten hours of the soul, pieces of emotion made tangible. Folded. Sealed. Sent. When she finishes, Eleanor seals it with red wax. Not pink, not gold. Red. A quiet choice. She tucks it into her letter box, knowing it will travel far. She hopes he will read it by the sea. Then she returns to her chair, lifts his letter once more, and holds it close, like a whispered memory. For in this time, in this world, letters were not just words. They were devotion. They were presence. They were love, written slowly, so it would last. The sky is a soft silver this morning, with clouds hanging low like lace curtains drawn across the heavens. The fire crackles gently, and Eleanor has placed a pot of tea to steep beside her on a small tray. On the writing desk, a blank sheet of parchment waits patiently, its surface smooth and untouched. Today's letter is not meant for distance, or longing, or formality. It is a letter of friendship. The recipient is Margaret, a lifelong companion and fellow lover of quiet things. They met in childhood, two girls with ink-stained fingers and pockets full of wildflowers. Though they now live towns apart, their friendship endures in the form of letters, exchanged every fortnight without fail. Eleanor begins with a smile on her lips. My dearest Margaret. Her hand moves easily. The words are familiar, the tone relaxed, warm. She tells Margaret about her latest attempt at baking plum cake, how it collapsed in the center but tasted sweet enough anyway. She mentions the wren nesting in the garden wall and the new book she started reading, an old novel with worn pages and lovely prose. Victorian friendships often thrived on correspondence. In a world where travel was slow and visits rare, letters became the threads that wove relationships across time and place. They were more than updates, they were a way of walking together through life, even when apart. Eleanor knows Margaret's handwriting almost better than her own. Tall loops, strong descenders, and a fondness for blue ink. Margaret always includes a line from a poem at the end of her letters. Last week it was Wordsworth. Today, Eleanor includes a line in return. Friendship, she writes, quoting from a small book of verse, is the sunshine that lights the quiet corners of our lives. She folds the page, slips a pressed pansy between the folds, and seals the envelope with a soft violet wax. A gesture so small, but deeply thoughtful. A way to say, I thought of you today. Victorians often enclosed tokens in their letters, dried flowers, locks of hair, snippets of ribbon. These tiny objects became cherished keepsakes, carrying scent and sentiment across the miles. After sealing the letter, Eleanor walks it to the small wooden box by the front door, where it will wait for the postman's arrival. She pauses, feeling a sense of contentment. Friendship letters were not dramatic or poetic in the way that love letters often were. They were calm, consistent. A gentle exchange of comfort and care. Of being known. Eleanor returns to her chair, a little lighter than before. Writing to Margaret has reminded her that she is not alone in the world. That someone, somewhere, will smile today when they see her handwriting. That her thoughts matter to another heart. In the quiet hush of the room, she sips her tea and listens to the soft ticking of the clock. Another letter written. Another day made richer by the sharing of small joys. And though no words are spoken aloud, the house feels full, with memory, with affection, with connection. Such is the power of friendship, passed gently from hand to hand, in ink and in kindness. The air is still today. Not with peace, but with the kind of quiet that follows sorrow. Outside, the sky is heavy with clouds, and the trees move only when the wind sighs through their limbs. Eleanor sits at her writing desk, but her hand rests motionless above the paper. Before her lies a sheet of soft gray stationery, untouched. It is the kind she uses only when words are most difficult. A morning paper. In Victorian times, it was common to have specific paper and envelopes reserved for letters of condolence or grief, usually edged in black, or tinted a solemn shade of gray. The etiquette of grief was carefully observed, not because it was cold, but because it gave structure to something unspeakable. Eleanor has received word that her Aunt Beatrice has passed. She was an older woman with a stern smile and a warm heart, known for her garden and her stubborn cat and her deep love of poetry. Though not a constant presence in Eleanor's life, she was one of the anchors of childhood. Always there, always dependable. Her absence now echoes in unexpected corners. Eleanor breathes slowly. Her ink is darker today, freshly prepared. She dips her pen, carefully, and begins. Dear Cousin Thomas. I write with a heart made heavy. The words form slowly, tenderly. In the Victorian Age, expressions of grief were poetic, but never theatrical. They were restrained, respectful, and yet somehow deeply personal. The loss was acknowledged with elegance. The sadness shaped into language. Eleanor chooses her phrases with care. She mentions Beatrice's kindness, her memory of their summer walks through the orchard, her ability to quote Shakespeare from memory, even in old age. She writes not just to mourn, but to offer comfort. May her memory remain a warm light in the quiet of our lives, she writes. It is said that in grief, the writing of a letter can be a healing act. One puts sorrow into order. One gives the heart a place to rest. Eleanor feels this now. As though her thoughts, once a storm, have begun to settle with each line. She does not rush to close the letter. There are pauses. Silences. She lets the stillness stretch around her, as though the room itself is grieving gently with her. When the letter is finished, she folds it carefully and places it in an envelope lined with black. The wax she chooses is dark plum, nearly black, but with a subtle warmth, like twilight. She places the letter aside and sits in the silence. Victorian morning rituals extended to dress, to speech, to social interaction, and yes, to letters. But beneath the customs was something more tender, a belief that words could carry empathy across distances. That one could, with ink and paper, wrap another in comfort. Later, she opens the wooden box on her shelf. Inside are letters she has received in past times of grief. Condolences, written in loving hands. Some with short verses. Others with only a few lines, but deeply heartfelt. She runs her fingers across one from years ago, her father's passing. A letter from a friend who had simply written, I do not know what to say. But I am here. That line still lingers. She understands now, more than ever, that letters are not just for celebration or longing. They are for loss. For remembrance. For carrying each other through sorrow when arms cannot. And so today's letter, though written in mourning, is full of love. The candle burns low. Outside, the clouds begin to break just slightly. A glimmer of sun touches the edge of the garden path. Eleanor breathes out softly. And the grief, though not gone, feels shared. The candle flickers gently on the mantel as Eleanor turns a page in her notebook. Her letter has been written, sealed, and sent. Now, as she sits by the fire, she thinks of the journey it will make. Few consider what happens to a letter after it leaves their hands. But in Victorian England, every letter passed through a finely tuned network, a system vast and intricate, as precise as a clock. The Royal Mail was the pride of the age. Eleanor imagines it now, her letter leaving the post office in a satchel, carried by a postal rider or coach to the nearest mail hub. There, it would be sorted in a large hall filled with clerks, paper, and stamps. Men in waistcoats and ink-stained cuffs would separate the letters by town and district, speaking softly beneath the gas lamps. Mail was collected and dispatched multiple times a day, especially in cities. In rural villages like Eleanor's, there were fewer runs. But still enough that one might send a letter in the morning and receive a reply the next. She stares out the window. Somewhere, a train whistles. The advent of the railway transformed everything. Letters that once took days now arrived overnight. Mail trains had their own carriages, complete with sorting compartments. Clerks worked during the ride, tossing letters into pigeonhole compartments as the countryside rolled past. It is said that the post was so reliable, a young man in London could write to his beloved in Surrey in the morning, receive her reply by evening, and write again before nightfall. Eleanor smiles faintly. Such thoughtfulness. Such care. It was not only the speed that impressed, it was the system's belief in the value of communication. In the importance of connection. The penny post, introduced in 1840, made this possible for all. For a single penny, anyone, regardless of wealth, could send a letter anywhere in Britain. It changed lives. Suddenly, the written word belonged not only to the elite, but to shopkeepers, servants, governesses, and schoolboys. And people wrote. They wrote often. They wrote deeply. Eleanor remembers visiting the post office as a girl. The smell of ink and old wood. The sound of stamps clicking. The polite hush of the room as people waited, holding their letters like precious things. Behind the scenes, so many hands moved her words forward, postmasters, carriers, drivers, clerks. And she, at home, with her candle and paper, was part of it. A quiet link in a great living chain. She thinks of this now as she prepares her next letter. Each envelope she seals is not only a message, it is a traveler. A journey. A small, sealed world that will pass through so many places, guided by invisible hands. A gentle breeze lifts the edge of the lace curtain. Eleanor sits at her writing desk with her gloves folded beside her, a cup of tea cooling slowly. Today's task is simple, replying to an invitation. And yet, even this requires thought. In the Victorian Age, letter writing was not only personal, it was guided by deeply ingrained rules of etiquette. These customs were not seen as restrictions, but as courtesies. A form of respect, both for the sender and the receiver. Eleanor selects a sheet of pale cream paper, undecorated and dignified. The tone of this letter must be formal, yet warm. The recipient is an old family acquaintance, Miss Lockwood, who is hosting a small musical gathering next Thursday. She begins as tradition dictates. My dear Miss Lockwood, I am much obliged to you for your kind invitation. Victorians were careful with greetings and closings. A wrong salutation could be seen as a social misstep. Letters to acquaintances were never too familiar. Those to elders always carried an air of deference. Even spacing mattered, writing too close to the edge of the page was considered improper. There were rules for everything. When to respond, within 3 days. When to use morning paper, within the first year of bereavement. When to cross-write, writing in 2 directions to save paper, only when writing to close friends or family, never to someone formal. Eleanor's pen glides in practiced lines. She thanks Miss Lockwood for the invitation, mentions her interest in the music to be played, and politely confirms her attendance. There are no unnecessary flourishes. Just clarity and poise. I look forward to the pleasure of your company, and remain. Yours sincerely, Eleanor Whitmore. She sets the letter aside to dry. Then she chooses an envelope, not scented, not colored, just a simple ivory, and seals it with plain wax. No emblem. No pressed flower. That too would be inappropriate for such a reply. Letter writing was, in many ways, a social language. To write a proper letter was to show one's character, refinement, and care. A sloppy letter, no matter how sincere, could reflect poorly on the writer's upbringing. In some circles, letters were kept and shown to others, proof of good taste and breeding. Eleanor finds comfort in this order. In a world that is sometimes unpredictable, there is peace in knowing the rules. And yet, she also knows when to bend them. To a friend, she might write with playful sketches in the margins. To a cousin, she might include a sprig of rosemary or a line of poetry. But today's letter, simple and respectful, is just as meaningful. She places it in the post tray, folds her gloves, and rises. There is a quiet satisfaction in following such rituals. A rhythm to etiquette that soothes the mind. Each part, paper, ink, tone, salutation, is a step in a graceful dance. And when done with care, even the most ordinary letter becomes a small act of beauty. The first snow of winter has begun to fall. Outside Eleanor's window, the garden lies still beneath a blanket of white, the stone path half hidden, the branches etched in frost. The world is hushed, as though holding its breath. Inside, a fire crackles softly, casting flickering light upon the room. Eleanor draws her shawl closer and smiles as she reaches for her writing box. There is something about winter that makes letter writing feel even more intimate, as though the cold world outside only deepens the warmth of connection through words. She selects thick parchment paper, a little stiffer than her usual, to guard against the damp. Her fingers are cold, but she finds comfort in the quiet scratch of her pen, in the way her breath fogs faintly in the air. Her letter today is for her cousin Sarah, who lives in a southern town where snow rarely touches the ground. Dear Sarah, she writes. The snow has finally arrived. It fell silently through the night, and the whole world now looks as though it has been dusted with sugar. Each season brings its own language, its own details to be noticed and shared. Eleanor loves writing about nature, about the way things feel at a specific time of year. She tells Sarah how the trees looked in the early morning light, how the frost had turned the garden fence into lace, and how the cat refuses to leave the rug by the fire. Victorians often wrote with the seasons in mind. Weather was not merely small talk, it was observation, reflection, even metaphor. A letter in spring might include pressed blossoms or a sketch of a bird. A summer letter might speak of garden parties, open windows, and late evening walks. Autumn brought thoughts of harvest, of falling leaves, of change. And winter brought silence, reflection, the comfort of memory. Eleanor recalls a letter she once received in autumn, written in sepia ink on burnt orange paper. The words were ordinary, but the colors made the letter feel like a piece of the season itself. Today, she decides to enclose a small snowflake cut from parchment, folded delicately and tied with silver thread. A small gesture. A seasonal touch. Something tactile for Sarah to hold, proof of the snow she cannot see. The seasons shape more than the scenery, they shape the mood of a letter. Eleanor notices her tone is softer in winter, her thoughts slower, more inward. She writes more about memories. About longing. About comfort and home. As she nears the end of her letter, she writes. There is a stillness in the air today. The kind that invites reflection. I thought of you this morning as I watched the snow fall. I hope you, too, have something quiet and beautiful to look at. She signs it simply, warmly. With love and frost-kissed thoughts. Eleanor. The letter is folded, sealed with a wax stamp shaped like a snowdrop. She places it gently in the tray by the door. And then she sits quietly for a moment, hands wrapped around a warm teacup, watching the snowfall count. The morning is quiet, with a soft golden light streaming in through the window panes. Eleanor, wrapped in a linen shawl, sits cross-legged on the floor beside her cedar chest. Today is not a day for writing letters, but for reading them. In the Victorian Age, letters were rarely discarded. They were cherished, tied with ribbon, stored in boxes made of wood, tin, or tooled leather. Letters were not simply pieces of correspondence, they were keepsakes. Fragments of time. Echoes of voices long gone. Eleanor opens her memory box, lifting the lid slowly, as if not to disturb the spirits it holds. Inside are bundles of letters, some wrapped in blue silk, others bound in simple twine. Each has its own story, its own season, its own feeling. She unties a crimson ribbon and unfolds a letter from her brother Henry, written years ago from his boarding school. The ink has faded slightly, the paper creased, but the energy is still there. He had drawn a map in the margin. A tiny sketch of the grounds where he'd explored. His boyish joy lingers in the page. Eleanor smiles softly and reaches for another. This one is different, thicker paper, with elegant loops of cursive. A letter from her mother, written during a summer illness when Eleanor had been sent to stay with her aunt. The words are tender. The handwriting shaky but loving. My darling Nell. I know you missed the garden, but remember that Aunt Agnes makes the finest gooseberry jam. As Eleanor reads, she feels her mother's presence return, gentle, fragrant, familiar. In Victorian times, it was common for families to preserve letters for generations. In attics and drawers, they kept the written voices of grandparents, great-aunts, and distant cousins. Some families compiled them into albums, carefully gluing the letters onto thick cream pages, annotating them in the margins. Eleanor runs her fingers across the folded corners, the wax seals now brittle. Here lies an entire lifetime of emotion. Joy, sorrow, confusion, hope, pressed between pages like dried flowers. She finds one more letter, tucked inside a muslin handkerchief. A love letter, written to her grandmother by a man she never married. The letter is dated 1846 and smells faintly of lavender. The ink is blurred in places, tears, perhaps. I shall think of you each time the clock strikes 6, it reads. And when it is spring, I will know you are near. Such words, Eleanor thinks, are not easily thrown away. She does not read the entire letter, out of respect. Some sentiments belong to their time, their bearer. But she refolds it gently and lays it back. Keepsake letters are unlike any other possession. They are the past, speaking in present tense. They do not fade, they wait. Quietly. Until someone opens the box again and listens. Eleanor ties the ribbons, closes the lid, and returns the box to its shelf. Not every letter is saved, of course. But those that are, chosen, cherished, become something more. They are not simply ink on paper. The hour is late. Outside, the world has grown still. No more carts on the road, no footsteps on the gravel path, no birdsong. Only the whisper of wind through the hedgerow and the soft ticking of the clock on the mantel. Eleanor remains awake. She sits at her writing desk, a candle flickering low beside her, casting a gentle glow upon the pages before her. The rest of the house slumbers in quiet, but this is her time. The stillness of night has always invited reflection. And in the Victorian era, many chose to write their letters beneath the veil of darkness, when distractions fell away and thoughts moved with greater clarity. There's a special intimacy in writing by candlelight. The shadows on the wall dance as the pen moves slowly across the page. Words feel softer, quieter, more deliberate. In the hush of night, one speaks differently, more honestly, perhaps. More soulfully. Eleanor's letter tonight is not urgent. Not necessary. It is written for no reason other than to speak. To reach across the miles and say, I was thinking of you. She writes to a friend she hasn't seen in many months. A woman named Margaret, who now lives in a seaside town and often speaks of salt air and wide skies. Eleanor imagines her, alone in a cottage by the shore, and wonders whether she, too, writes by candlelight. Dearest Margaret. The house is silent tonight, and my thoughts have turned to you. Eleanor describes the day, how the frost clung to the windows, how the fire crackled like old parchment. She shares small observations, simple joys. The cat curled in the armchair. The way the tea tasted especially warm after a walk in the cold. This is the gift of letters written at night, they are unhurried. There's no rush. No performance. Only presence. In Victorian households, candlelight was sacred. Not just for its warmth and light, but for the mood it created. A soft invitation to think, to remember, to hope. Many diaries were written in these hours. Many poems. And many tender confessions. Eleanor writes slowly. Her words are thoughtful but not heavy. She tells Margaret about an old book she's been rereading, about a neighbor's baby who now toddles down the lane, about a dream she had of a garden in bloom. Nothing dramatic. Just connection. She signs her letter. With a heart full of stillness and soft thoughts. Eleanor. Then she extinguishes the candle. For a moment, she sits in the dark. She feels peaceful. In a world that is so often loud, so busy, these quiet moments, where one soul reaches for another across time and paper, are precious. Night letters were often kept. Their words lingered longer. Perhaps because they carried the hush of the hour within them. And so, Eleanor places the letter gently in her outbox, ready for the morning post. It will leave at dawn. But it was born in the quiet of night. And that, perhaps, makes it all the more special. A pale spring morning has arrived. The sun peeks through a light mist that lingers above the hedges, and the garden is slowly waking. Dew glistens on the petals of early blossoms, violets, snowdrops, and pale pink hyacinths. Inside, Eleanor stands at her writing desk with a vase of fresh blooms nearby. Today, she is writing a different sort of letter, one that carries a quiet message, not only in words, but in flowers. In the Victorian era, flowers were more than decoration. They were symbols, part of a secret code known as the language of flowers, or floriography. When sent alongside letters, or even between the folds of the page, each flower spoke a word, a sentiment, a feeling left unsaid. Eleanor selects her paper carefully, along with a small bundle of pressed blooms tied with a silk ribbon. She has chosen them with care. A sprig of lavender for devotion. A white violet for innocence. A fern leaf for sincerity. And a single yellow rose, for friendship. Her letter is addressed to a young woman named Clara, recently widowed. Eleanor has known her since childhood, and though they haven't spoken in months, she feels now is the time to reach out. Dearest Clara. I've thought of you often these past weeks, and today the garden whispered your name. She writes gently, never directly mentioning the loss, but acknowledging the quiet weight Clara now carries. She remembers a childhood game they played, collecting wildflowers and pressing them in books. She recalls the long summer afternoons of their youth and how Clara once said that violets reminded her of her mother's singing voice. As the pen glides across the paper, Eleanor finds herself speaking more through suggestion than declaration. This, too, was common in Victorian letter writing. When feelings were too delicate for direct language, metaphors, like flowers, were used to say the unsayable. There were entire books published on the meanings of flowers. A camellia meant admiration. A pansy, thinking of you. Forget-me-nots were simple, poignant remembrances. Even the way a flower was presented mattered. If the stem faced upward, it meant affirmation. Downward, regret. Eleanor folds the letter softly and wraps the ribbon bouquet inside, sealing it with a light blue wax. It is not meant to surprise or impress. Only to comfort. To let Clara know that someone, somewhere, still sees her. Still remembers her joy. Still believes in the healing beauty of nature. The note ends. I send these not as tokens, but as companions, quiet and constant. May they rest beside you in silence, and remind you that spring always returns. Letters such as these were often kept in drawers lined with lavender sachets. Their scent, mingled with the flowers, became part of the memory. They were opened and reread on difficult days, their words and symbols offering more than language ever could. The rain falls steadily today, in soft rhythms against the glass. The world outside is gray and blurred, like a watercolor left out in the weather. But Eleanor doesn't mind the rain. It reminds her of waiting. And waiting reminds her of the letters that traveled far, across oceans, through uncertain hands, to bring the voice of a loved one home. In the Victorian era, international correspondence was a patient person's art. Steamships carried letters over vast waters, and postal routes twisted through foreign towns, across borders, and into strange, dusty sorting rooms. A single letter from England to India or Canada could take weeks, even months, to arrive. Eleanor's sister, Beatrice, now lives in Boston. Her last letter took 42 days to arrive. And though the ink had blurred from sea damp, and the corners were creased, the moment Eleanor unfolded it, it was as if her sister stood in the room with her. There is something sacred about a letter that has traveled so far. It has survived storms, handling, oceans, and time. And when it arrives, the voice it carries is already a memory, captured from weeks before. My dearest Eleanor, the letter had begun. By the time you read this, the lilacs will likely have faded, but I hope the roses are in bloom. The sentence made Eleanor pause. It reminded her that letter writing across distance is not just communication, it's time travel. A message preserved. A voice delayed, but not lost. In the Victorian Age, many families depended on these letters. Sons working abroad. Daughters who had married far away. Explorers, missionaries, and merchants. Their words were the only tether across such distances. Some of these letters were written in duplicate, 2 or even 3 copies, sent on different ships, to increase the chance that at least one would arrive. And often, the letters were written with exquisite detail, because the sender knew that until the next ship sailed, this one message must sustain the reader. Eleanor remembers reading such a letter, written by her great-uncle in Calcutta. It was 20 pages long. It described the sound of the birds, the color of the spices in the marketplace, the taste of tea at dawn. He wrote, "I want you to smell the air here, even if you never step foot upon this land." She thinks of Beatrice often. Of the tea they used to drink in the garden. Of the way her sister laughed when she told a story. Letters now carry those sounds back across the sea, echoing faintly in her mind. Eleanor prepares to write her reply today. She chooses cream-colored paper with a sturdy grain, something that can endure the journey. She writes slowly, with clarity, describing the days as if painting them. She mentions the scent of the roses, the new lace curtains, the way the light changes near twilight. She knows that each word, when it arrives, will bring home a piece of England to her sister's New England doorstep. When this reaches you, she writes, the leaves may already be turning in your part of the world. But I hope you will sit by your window with a warm cup of tea and read this as if we were together again. She folds the pages carefully, tucks in a sprig of press thyme, and seals it with gold wax. Then, with quiet hope, she places it in the box for outgoing mail. It may take weeks. But it will arrive. And when it does, Eleanor's voice will echo, warm and real, across the water. In a world of distance, the letter becomes more than communication. It becomes presence. The morning sun has broken through the clouds, and light falls in golden shafts upon the oak writing desk in the parlor. The window is slightly open, allowing a breeze to rustle the curtain lace. Eleanor sits down, as she always does at this hour, with a cup of warm tea and a biscuit crumbling slightly on the saucer. It is her daily ritual, one that grounds her, comforts her, and opens a door to reflection. In the Victorian era, letter writing was more than a task. For many, it was a form of meditation. A slow, purposeful act repeated each day with intention. Some wrote only a few lines. Others filled entire sheets. But each day, the act of writing was a quiet ceremony of thought and feeling. Eleanor begins by selecting her tools. She chooses a pen with a fine nib, an inkwell of deep chestnut brown, and a stack of lightly textured parchment. Nearby, a bundle of previous letters is tied with blue ribbon, a reminder of her ongoing conversations, both near and far. She begins with a letter to her cousin Isabel. My dearest cousin. This morning the garden was filled with mist, and I found myself thinking of our childhood walks. There is no urgency. No pressure. Eleanor writes not to inform, but to share. To invite Isabel into a small moment of her day, a quiet corner of her mind. Many Victorians embraced this kind of letter writing as a way to process their emotions, reflect on their lives, or simply bring rhythm to their mornings. Much like a journal, but addressed to another heart. A silent exchange, awaiting a voice in return. For Eleanor, this ritual helps her see more clearly. To write is to observe. The blue-gray shadow of the clouds. The faint creak of the stairs. The way the cat stretches across the sun-warmed floorboards. These moments become sentences. And the sentences become offerings. She writes another short note, this time to her neighbor Mrs. Blackwell, who has been unwell. The note is brief, but sincere. I passed the blackberry bushes yesterday and thought you'd like to know they've finally ripened. I shall bring some by soon. Kindness, in letters, was often simple. A reminder that someone had thought of you. That you had not been forgotten. Eleanor places the letters in a tray for the footman to collect. As she sips her now lukewarm tea, she takes a moment to review her writing box. Everything has its place, folded sheets of stationery, a bone-handled letter opener, spare ribbons, sealing wax, dried lavender tucked in the corner. These tools are not just practical, they are companions in her ritual. In the Victorian home, letter writing often took place in designated rooms or corners. The act itself became a kind of daily performance, a gentle, domestic art form that combined etiquette, care, and expression. Some wrote every morning before breakfast. Others, like Eleanor, found the late morning hours most tranquil. But all found something sacred in the slowness. Because a letter asks something of us that few other things do, it asks us to pause. To consider. To feel. And in that stillness, the writer becomes more than a messenger. She becomes a keeper of moments. As Eleanor places her pen down, she breathes deeply. Outside, the garden hums with quiet life. A bird alights on the sill. A bee drifts past. Another letter will be written tomorrow. But for now, the ritual is complete. And the silence that follows is full, not empty. Full of intention, full of memory, full of the calm satisfaction of having reached out, gently. The fire crackles low in the hearth as shadows stretch along the floor. Evening has arrived quietly, cloaking the house in gentle hush. Eleanor sits beside an older woman, her Aunt Cecily, wrapped in a heavy shawl, hands folded atop a worn journal. Cecily's breath is shallow but steady. Her eyes, though dimmed by time, still hold a glimmer of curiosity. And beside her on the table rests a stack of letters, bound not in ribbon, but in memory. In the Victorian era, writing letters at the end of life was not unusual. It was a way to say goodbye with grace. A final act of reflection and love. Some wrote letters to their children to be read after they passed. Others addressed friends long unseen, or siblings, or even the world itself. A letter could offer comfort, clarity, or a gentle release. Eleanor gently opens the desk and removes a piece of parchment. Her aunt has asked her to help write a final letter. Not because she cannot hold the pen, but because she wants the words spoken aloud as they are formed. She begins. My dear Margaret, I do not know if this will reach you in time, but that is not what matters. What matters is that it is written. Cecily pauses, eyes closed, gathering memories like leaves in her lap. Her voice, though faint, is steady. I remember the yellow shawl you wore the day we said goodbye. I remember how tightly you hugged me, and how you whispered, "You'll do just fine." You were right. I've done just fine. The letter flows like a quiet stream. There is no urgency, only peace. Cecily speaks of their garden, the tea they once shared, the birds that used to nest beneath the windowsill. And of forgiveness, for both of them, for things long past and long softened. Eleanor writes slowly, listening between the words. In the Victorian Age, it was believed that the written word outlasted the voice. And so letters became vessels, not only for communication, but for legacy. Many such letters were kept, folded neatly in drawers, to be read after loss. Some were even placed into the hands of loved ones during burial. A final message. A silent embrace. As Cecily finishes her thoughts, Eleanor reads the letter aloud once more. The room is still. The candle flickers. I thank you for the kindness you gave me when I did not ask for it. I carry it with me still. Yours, as always, Cecily. The envelope is sealed, marked with a name and no address. It may never be posted. It may never need to be. What mattered was the writing. And in writing, the remembering. Eleanor places the letter with the others. Dozens of them, collected across a lifetime, notes of love, of regret, of joy. Letters written at thresholds, when something was ending and something else was beginning. That night, Eleanor sits alone by the fire, reflecting. She thinks of how letters give us one last chance to speak, to say the unsaid, to acknowledge the journey, to leave a piece of ourselves behind. For even as breath fades, words remain. The morning is still. A soft haze floats just above the grass outside, and inside the drawing room, Eleanor prepares to finish her latest letter. It is nearly complete, a note to her brother Charles, stationed in Edinburgh. The pages lie before her like petals, filled with inked thoughts and gentle sentiment. But before the letter can be sent, it must be closed, sealed, with the care and ceremony befitting a message of worth. In the Victorian era, the act of sealing a letter was an art form in itself. Eleanor reaches into her writing box and pulls out the tools for the final touch, a small brass spoon with a long handle, sticks of colored sealing wax, and her family's signet stamp, a delicately carved thistle, handed down from her grandfather. She lights a match and holds the wax over the flame. Slowly, patiently, she lets the wax melt into the spoon. It smells faintly of roses and cedar. A subtle scent added during its making, as many Victorian sealing waxes were crafted with perfumes or oils to enhance their beauty. As the wax warms, Eleanor remembers how sealing a letter once served not only an aesthetic purpose, but a practical one. Before envelopes became widespread in the mid-1800s, letters were folded into themselves, each edge carefully turned inward to protect the words within. Wax was then dropped at the fold, sealing the letter closed, and a stamp pressed into it, securing its contents and proving its sender. The seal was more than decoration. It was identity. Intimacy. A promise that the words inside were meant for no one else. Eleanor's wax has melted now, a rich plum shade, her favorite. She lets the drops fall in a neat circle onto the folded flap of the envelope. Then, with steady hands, she presses the brass seal into the warm pool and holds it there for a moment. When she lifts it, the thistle design is clear. Crisp. Proud. She smiles. There is something quietly satisfying about this part of the process. The seal is the letter's final breath. A moment of transformation, from loose words into something whole. Something finished. In the Victorian Age, sealing wax came in many shades. Red was traditional. Black, used for mourning. Blue or lavender for more personal or romantic messages. Green for cheerful, everyday notes. Each color whispered a different mood, a tone for the reader to sense even before the letter was opened. Some Victorians kept an entire palette of waxes, choosing each carefully to match their message. Eleanor enjoys this ritual, matching wax to letter, emotion to color. She believes that small gestures matter. Her mother used to say, even the seal tells a story, if you know how to read it. As she sets the sealed envelope aside, Eleanor thinks of the many seals pressed across time. Seals used by queens and poets. By lovers and soldiers. Some saved, some broken, but each a marker of connection. She gently places Charles's letter into the outgoing tray and begins preparing another sheet of parchment. The wax has cooled, but the scent still lingers. She selects a light green wax this time, for her friend Clara, who has just had a child. A cheerful message, wrapped in hope. Again the spoon, the match, the melt. Again the pressing of the seal into the soft, fragrant wax. Each time, the same care. The same respect. Because a letter, once sealed, carries more than ink. It carries intention. It carries meaning. It carries a promise. That what is written within matters. That it was written with feeling, and finished with grace. And in a world rushing forward, this small, ancient act reminds Eleanor to slow down, to touch the past, even briefly, and leave her mark. One seal at a time. The light is golden in the late afternoon, falling softly across Eleanor's writing desk. Dust floats in the sunbeams like tiny stars. The house is silent, but it's the kind of silence that hums with life, a hush that wraps around the walls like a familiar shawl. Eleanor sits with a single piece of parchment before her. Today, she is writing a letter to no one in particular. Or perhaps, to everyone. In the Victorian era, it was not unusual to write letters that were never sent. These were letters to lost loves, to time itself, to unborn generations. They were acts of thought, captured and preserved like pressed flowers. Eleanor dips her pen and begins slowly. If this letter is ever read, let it be known that on this quiet day, the garden was full of light. The roses had begun their second bloom, and the lavender was nearly humming with bees. There is no recipient's name. No return address. Only the weight of sincerity. I have written many letters in my lifetime. Letters of love, of sorrow, of small joys. Some have reached their readers. Some never did. But all of them carried a part of me. She pauses. Outside, a bird lands on the stone ledge. Its tiny feet click against the windowsill. The scent of tea leaves lingers in the room, bergamot and honey. In writing, I have found myself. I have soothed wounds. I have stitched time. I have remembered. Victorians believed deeply in the legacy of the written word. A letter could outlive its author. It could survive wars, floods, silence. It could travel across oceans or lie folded for centuries in a drawer, waiting to be discovered. Whoever you are, reading this, know that someone, long ago, sat in the soft light of a fading day and thought of the world with wonder. Thought of you. Thought of us. Eleanor finishes the final line. This letter is a kindness. A whisper across time. A hand reaching through the dark, simply to say, we were here. She signs only her first name. No seal. No wax. No envelope. Just a fold, neat and slow, and a ribbon to hold it. She places the letter in her small chest of writing, a box filled with decades of correspondence, fragments of herself preserved in pen and paper. And then she closes the lid. Outside, the sun begins to set, brushing the sky in soft pinks and silvers. A clock chimes somewhere far in the house. One last note in the day's quiet melody. The world keeps spinning. But somewhere, a letter rests. Waiting. Perhaps it will be found someday. Perhaps not. But it was written. And that is enough. And in a world rushing forward, this small, ancient act reminds Eleanor to slow down, to touch the past, even briefly, and leave her mark. One seal at a time.